I was harvesting apples from my great-grandfather's trees when a white Lexus SUV came barreling down my driveway like it owned the place, kicking up dust and startling the robins that had been pecking at fallen fruit beneath the branches. The woman who emerged wore what I'd come to recognize as the standard suburban warrior uniform. Yoga pants that had never seen a gym, designer sunglasses perched on bleached blonde hair, and a clipboard clutched like a weapon. Her name was Patricia Caldwell, and she was the president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, the subdivision that had sprouted up around my property like mushrooms after rain about 15 years ago. "Excuse me," she called out in that particular tone that wasn't really asking to be excused at all. "I need to speak with you about these trees." I set down my basket and wiped my hands on my jeans. The September sun was warm on my back, and I'd been looking forward to a peaceful afternoon of picking apples from the orchard that had been in my family since 1947. My name is Marcus Webb, and I'm the fourth generation to maintain this land in rural Michigan, just outside of Traverse City. The property had been farmland long before anyone thought to build cookie-cutter houses and winding cul-de-sacs around it. "What about them?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. This wasn't Patricia's first visit, but something about her energy today felt different, more aggressive. She consulted her clipboard with theatrical importance. According to the community guidelines established in 2009, all fruit-bearing trees within the Meadowbrook Heights community boundaries are considered shared resources. Residents have been complaining that you've been monopolizing the apple harvest and refusing to share with your neighbors. I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "Patricia, these trees were planted by my great-grandfather in 1947. This orchard predates your subdivision by over 60 years. They're on my private property, which I own outright with a deed that goes back to the original land grant." Her lips pursed into a tight line, creating those vertical wrinkles that no amount of anti-aging cream could fix. "The boundary survey from the subdivision clearly shows that your property falls within the Meadowbrook Heights community borders. That makes you subject to HOA regulations, including the community sharing clause." "No," I said flatly. "My property is grandfathered in. I'm not part of your HOA. I never signed any agreements, and I never will. The developer knew that when he built around me. We had lawyers involved, and everything was settled years ago." Patricia's face was turning an interesting shade of pink that clashed with her foundation. "I have it on good authority that these trees should be accessible to all residents. The HOA board voted last night, and we've decided that starting Monday, the orchard will be open for community harvesting from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. daily." The audacity of it actually left me speechless for a moment. I'd heard stories about HOA overreach, but this was something else entirely. "You can't vote to take control of my private property, Patricia. That's not how property rights work in America." "We'll see about that," she snapped, her sunglasses sliding down her nose as she jabbed a finger toward the nearest apple tree, a beautiful golden delicious that my great-grandfather had grafted himself. "These trees are overgrown, dropping fruit on community pathways and creating a maintenance issue. If you won't cooperate voluntarily, we'll be forced to take legal action. The nearest community pathway is half a mile from here," I pointed out. "And you're standing on my driveway, which is also private property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Patricia's expression turned venomous. "You're going to regret this, Mr. Webb. Nobody fights the HOA and wins. Nobody." She spun on her heel, nearly twisting her ankle on the uneven ground, and marched back to her Lexus. The SUV roared to life, and she executed a dramatic three-point turn before speeding back down the driveway. I stood there for a long moment, looking at my trees. 23 mature apple trees, 7 cherry trees, 4 pear trees, and 2 ancient plum trees that were nearly as old as my grandfather would have been if he'd lived. Every spring they exploded into clouds of white and pink blossoms. Every fall they produced more fruit than I could possibly use myself, which is why I'd always shared with actual neighbors. The old farming families who'd been here long before Meadowbrook Heights existed, and donated bushels to the Traverse City Food Bank. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my cousin Daniel who practiced property law in Detroit. I called him back immediately. "Marcus, hey, I was just thinking about you," Daniel said. "How's the harvest looking this year?" "Good, but we have a problem," I told him, launching into the story of Patricia's visit and her absurd claims. Daniel was quiet for a moment after I finished. "Okay, first of all, she has absolutely no legal standing. Your property predates the subdivision, you never signed any HOA agreements, and you have clear title to the land. The orchard is unquestionably your private property." "That's what I thought," I said, feeling some of the tension leave my shoulders. "However," Daniel continued, and I could hear the concern in his voice, "HOAs can be incredibly persistent, and they often have money to burn on legal fees. They'll file frivolous lawsuits, drag you through court, and make your life miserable even if they know they'll lose. It's a war of attrition." "So what do I do?" "Document everything. Every interaction, every letter, every visit. Take photos, keep records, and send me copies of your property deed, the original subdivision plat, and any correspondence you've had with the HOA or the developer. I'll put together a cease and desist letter. If they persist after that, we'll consider a restraining order or an injunction." I spent the rest of the afternoon photographing my property boundaries, digging through the fireproof safe where I kept important documents, and scanning everything to send to Daniel. The original deed was beautifully handwritten, dated 1889, transferring ownership of 160 acres from the U.S. Land Office to my great-great-grandfather, Thomas Webb. Subsequent deeds traced the property through my family, and while we'd sold off parcels over the years as the family shrank and farming became less profitable, I still owned the core 15 acres that included the house, the orchard, and the old barn. The subdivision plat from 2007 clearly showed my property as a separate parcel, not included in the Meadowbrook Heights development. There was even a note on the plat. Parcel 47B, Webb property, not included in HOA covenant. It was right there in black and white. I was scanning the last document when I heard vehicles coming up the driveway. Multiple vehicles. I looked out the window and felt my stomach drop. 5 cars were pulling up to my house and people were getting out, carrying baskets and bags. Patricia was leading them, wearing a satisfied smile that made me want to throw something. I met them at the porch. "Stop right there. This is private property and you're all trespassing." "Community Harvest Day," Patricia announced cheerfully, like she was hosting a parade. "We're here to collect our share of the community orchard. Everyone, please remember to pick carefully and leave some fruit for others." A man in cargo shorts and a golf shirt looked uncomfortable. "Patricia, are you sure about this? He seems pretty clear that this is his property." "Don't worry, Gerald. I've consulted with the HOA's legal team. We're well within our rights." Patricia started walking toward the nearest tree. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I need to report trespassing. I have approximately 20 people on my property refusing to leave after being asked." That stopped them. Several people immediately started backing toward their cars. Patricia's smile faltered. "You're calling the police on your neighbors?" she asked incredulously. "I'm calling the police on trespassers who are attempting to steal my property," I corrected. The sound of approaching sirens made the decision for most of them. By the time Deputy Sheriff Mike Kowalski pulled up in his cruiser, 15 of the 20 had fled, leaving only Patricia and 4 die-hard supporters standing awkwardly in my driveway. Mike had been 2 years behind me in high school, and he knew the history of my property. "Afternoon, Marcus. What seems to be the problem?" I explained the situation while Patricia sputtered objections. Mike listened patiently, then turned to Patricia. "Ma'am, do you have any documentation showing that you have legal access to this property?" "The HOA bylaws clearly state," "Ma'am, I asked if you have documentation showing legal access to this specific property. This parcel is not part of the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision according to county records." Patricia's face was cycling through several shades of red and purple. "This is harassment. I'm going to report you for not enforcing community standards." "You're welcome to file a complaint with the sheriff's department," Mike said evenly. "But right now, I need you and your group to leave this property immediately. If you return without the owner's permission, you'll be arrested for criminal trespassing." "This isn't over," Patricia hissed at me as she retreated to her Lexus. Her remaining supporters scattered to their cars, avoiding eye contact. Mike waited until they'd all driven off before turning to me with a sympathetic expression. "These HOA people are something else. My sister deals with them in her neighborhood. They sent her a violation notice because her mailbox was the wrong shade of beige." "Thanks for coming out so quickly," I said. "No problem, but Marcus, seriously, you might want to talk to a lawyer, document this stuff. HOA disputes can get ugly." He paused. "And hey, do you still donate apples to the food bank?" "My mom volunteers there, and she says your fruit is always the best quality they receive." "Every year," I confirmed. "I've got about 30 bushels set aside for them already." After Mike left, I called Daniel again and told him what had happened. He was furious on my behalf, which was oddly comforting. "That's criminal trespassing, Marcus. They actually showed up with intent to take your property." "I'm drafting that cease and desist tonight, and I'm going to include a warning that any further trespassing will result in criminal charges and a civil lawsuit for harassment." "Will that actually stop them?" "It should. Most HOA boards are used to bullying people who don't know their rights. When they run into actual legal resistance, they usually back off. But I'll be honest, this Patricia person sounds unhinged. Keep your phone on you, keep recording everything, and don't hesitate to call the police again if she comes back." That evening, I sat on my porch with a beer and looked out at the orchard as the sun set behind the trees. The apples glowed like ornaments in the golden light. My great-grandfather had planted these trees after returning from World War II, working the land to recover from things he'd never talk about. My grandfather had maintained them, adding the cherry trees in the 1960s. My father had kept the tradition alive, teaching me how to prune, how to recognize disease, how to harvest at the peak of ripeness. This wasn't just an orchard. It was my family's legacy, grown from the soil and tended with care across generations. The idea that some HOA busybody thought she could just vote to take it was infuriating on a level I hadn't experienced before. Monday morning brought a certified letter from the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. I signed for it with a sense of dread and opened it at my kitchen table. The letter was 3 pages of dense legal language, but the core message was clear. I was being fined $5,000 for refusing community access to shared resources and violation of community agricultural standards. Additionally, the HOA was demanding that I submit to a property boundary review to determine the accurate borders of my land. I photographed every page and sent them to Daniel, then called him. "They're insane," he said flatly. "You can't find someone who isn't a member of your HOA. This is actionable harassment. I'm filing a restraining order against Patricia Caldwell personally and against the HOA board collectively. And I'm going to recommend that you countersue for harassment, trespass, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." "I don't want a lawsuit, Daniel. I just want them to leave me alone." "I understand, but sometimes you have to show strength to make bullies back down. Let me at least get the restraining order in place. That'll prevent them from coming to your property or contacting you directly." Over the next week, things escalated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Someone posted on the Meadowbrook Heights Facebook group, painting me as a greedy landowner hoarding community resources. The post included my address and phone number. I started receiving calls and messages at all hours, people demanding free apples or calling me selfish. Then the vandalism started. On Wednesday night, someone spray-painted "Share the Harvest" across my barn in bright orange letters. On Friday, I found nails scattered across my driveway. On Saturday morning, I discovered that someone had attempted to cut down one of my young apple trees, sawing halfway through the trunk before apparently giving up or getting scared off. That was when I installed security cameras. 6 of them, covering every approach to my house and orchard. The system cost me nearly $2,000, but I needed evidence. Daniel's cease and desist letter arrived at HOA headquarters on Monday, and the restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, the harassment continued. Someone toilet papered my trees. Someone else dumped a load of garbage at the end of my driveway. My mailbox was smashed with a baseball bat. Every incident was captured on camera, and every incident was reported to the sheriff's department. Deputy Kowalski came out so many times that we were on a first-name basis. "This is getting out of hand, Marcus," Mike said on his 4th visit in a week. "I've filed reports, but we need to catch someone in the act to make arrests. These recordings help, but most of them are too grainy to identify individuals." "What about Patricia? She's clearly the one organizing this." "Unless we can prove she's directly involved or directing others to commit crimes, our hands are tied. The sheriff is aware of the situation, though. We're stepping up patrols in your area." The restraining order hearing was held in Grand Traverse County Circuit Court on a rainy Tuesday morning. I took the day off from my job as a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant in town and met Daniel at the courthouse. Patricia showed up with her own lawyer, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Bradley Morrison from a Grand Rapids firm that specialized in HOA law. Judge Helen Martinez presided, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who listened impassively as Daniel presented our case. He had organized everything beautifully. Property deeds going back to 1889, the subdivision plat showing my exclusion from the HOA, photographs of the vandalism, police reports, the threatening letter demanding fines, and screenshots of the Facebook harassment campaign. "Your Honor," Daniel concluded, "Mr. Webb has been subjected to a systematic campaign of harassment and intimidation by the Meadowbrook Heights HOA and its president, Patricia Caldwell. Despite having no legal authority over his property, the HOA has attempted to exert control through threats, trespass, and coordinating what amounts to a harassment campaign against my client. We're seeking a restraining order preventing Miss Caldwell and the HOA board from contacting Mr. Webb or coming within 500 feet of his property." Bradley Morrison stood, smoothing his tie. "Your Honor, the Meadowbrook Heights HOA is simply trying to enforce community standards for the benefit of all residents. Mr. Webb's property, while historically separate, is now surrounded by the subdivision. His refusal to participate in reasonable community sharing programs has created tension. The HOA has every right to communicate with landowners in their area regarding community concerns." "Does your client have any legal authority over Mr. Webb's property?" Judge Martinez asked pointedly. Morrison hesitated. "The matter of jurisdictional boundaries is complex and may require additional surveying to determine. It's a yes or no question, Counselor." "Does the HOA have any legal authority over Mr. Webb's property?" "Not at this time, Your Honor, but—" "Then on what basis did your client attempt to levy a $5,000 fine against Mr. Webb?" Morrison's pause was telling. "The HOA board believed in good faith that certain community standards applied, based on what? Hope. Wishful thinking." Judge Martinez leafed through the documents before her. "I have a subdivision plat dated 2007 that explicitly excludes Mr. Webb's property from the HOA covenant. I have deeds showing clear title going back over a century. I have photographs of vandalism, police reports documenting harassment, and evidence of an organized campaign to intimidate Mr. Webb into surrendering his property rights." Patricia leaned forward to whisper something to Morrison, but Judge Martinez wasn't finished. "Miss Caldwell, Do you understand that property rights in this country are not subject to popular vote? You can't simply decide that you want access to someone else's land and then harass them until they give in. Patricia stood up, ignoring Morrison's attempts to pull her back down. Your Honor, this is about fairness. Those trees produce hundreds of pounds of fruit every year, and one person shouldn't be allowed to keep it all to himself when there's a whole community that could benefit. Sit down, Miss Caldwell, Judge Martinez said sharply. Your lawyer speaks for you in this courtroom, not the other way around. And for the record, what you're describing is called coveting your neighbor's property, which is both morally questionable and legally irrelevant. Patricia sat, her face burning with embarrassment and anger. Judge Martinez signed a document with a flourish. I'm granting the restraining order. Patricia Caldwell and all members of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA Board are prohibited from contacting Marcus Webb directly or indirectly, from entering his property, or from coming within 500 feet of his property boundaries. This order is effective immediately and will remain in place for 1 year, at which point Mr. Webb may petition for an extension if necessary. Your Honor, that's incredibly broad, Morrison objected. Several board members live in the subdivision. 500 feet could prevent them from accessing their own homes. Then, perhaps they should have thought about that before launching a harassment campaign, Judge Martinez replied coldly. If board members' homes fall within the restricted zone, they may petition individually for limited exceptions for direct travel to and from their residences only. But there will be no loitering, no stopping, and absolutely no contact with Mr. Webb. Any violation will result in contempt charges. Am I understood? Yes, Your Honor, Morrison said quietly. And Miss Caldwell, I'm putting you on notice. If any further vandalism or harassment of Mr. Webb occurs, I will hold you personally responsible regardless of whether you can be directly connected to the incidents. You've created an atmosphere of hostility and you will bear the consequences. If I see you in my courtroom again on this matter, you'll be facing criminal charges. Do I make myself clear? Patricia's voice was barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. As we left the courthouse, Daniel was practically bouncing with satisfaction. That was beautiful. Martinez doesn't mess around. You're protected now, Marcus. Do you really think it'll stop? With that kind of judicial smackdown, absolutely. Martinez is well respected in this county. Nobody's going to risk contempt charges or criminal prosecution just to harass you about apple trees. I wanted to believe him, but I'd seen the look in Patricia's eyes as we'd left the courtroom. That wasn't defeat, that was rage. For about a week, things were quiet. The harassment stopped. No more vandalism, no more angry messages, no more cars driving slowly past my property. I started to relax, thinking maybe Daniel had been right. Then I got a call from the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. An inspector named Sarah Chen wanted to schedule a visit to inspect my orchard for compliance with agricultural standards. What agricultural standards? I asked, confused. I'm not a commercial operation. This is a private orchard on residential land. We received a complaint alleging that you're selling uninspected produce, which requires licensing and regular inspections. I need to verify the complaint and assess whether you're in violation of state agricultural codes. I felt my blood pressure rising. Who filed the complaint? I can't disclose that information, but I can tell you it came through official channels. Can we schedule an inspection for next week? Fine, I said. But for the record, I don't sell anything. I give apples to friends and donate to the food bank. That's not a commercial operation. Sarah Chen turned out to be a pleasant, professional woman in her 40s who showed up with a clipboard and a sympathetic expression. I walked her through the orchard, explaining my practices, showing her my records of donations to the food bank, and making it clear that no money ever changed hands. Mr. Webb, I can see that you're not operating a commercial venture here, she said after about an hour. Your trees are healthy, well-maintained, and you're following good agricultural practices even though you're not required to. I'm going to close this complaint as unfounded. Can you tell me now who filed it? She consulted her tablet, then nodded. The complaint came from Patricia Caldwell, president of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. She claimed you were running an unlicensed commercial orchard and selling uninspected produce to the public. She's under a restraining order for harassment, I told her. This is her trying to continue the campaign through official channels. Sarah's expression hardened. That's a misuse of state resources. I'll be noting that in my report, and if Miss Caldwell files any further frivolous complaints, she'll be subject to penalties for false reporting. 2 days later, I got a call from the Grand Traverse County Health Department. Someone had reported me for operating an unlicensed food service operation. 3 days after that, the county zoning office called about an alleged violation of residential zoning codes. The fire marshal showed up to investigate a report of illegal burning. The EPA contacted me about a complaint regarding pesticide misuse. Every single complaint was filed by Patricia Caldwell or other HOA board members. Every single one was investigated and found to be baseless. And every single one cost me time, stress, and the growing certainty that this would never end unless I took more drastic action. She's violating the restraining order, Daniel said when I called to update him. Filing false complaints through government agencies counts as indirect contact and harassment. We're going back to court. The contempt hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, but things came to a head before we ever made it to court. It was a Thursday evening in October, and I was in the barn working on restoring an old tractor when my security system alert went off on my phone. I pulled it up and saw multiple people entering my orchard with flashlights. It was nearly dark, around 8 o'clock, and at least a dozen people were spreading out among my trees. I called 911 first, then grabbed my own flashlight and headed out. As I got closer, I could hear voices and laughter. People were picking apples in the dark, filling bags and baskets, treating my orchard like a public park. "Hey," I shouted. "You're trespassing, the police are on their way." Most of them scattered immediately, running back toward the subdivision. But 3 people stood their ground. Patricia Caldwell and 2 men I recognized as HOA board members, Robert and Thomas. "We have every right to be here," Patricia announced. "This orchard is a community resource and we're claiming it on behalf of the residents." "You're violating a court order," I said, holding up my phone to record. "You're currently under a restraining order that prohibits you from being on my property." "That order was unjust and we're challenging it," Patricia said. "Sometimes civil disobedience is necessary to fight tyranny." "Tyranny? You're comparing not getting free apples to tyranny? You're hoarding resources that should benefit the entire community. That's un-American." I could hear sirens in the distance. "You should leave before the police get here." "We're not afraid of your threats," Robert said, stepping forward aggressively. He was a big guy, over 6 feet and probably 250 pounds, and he was trying to intimidate me. "Back off," I warned. "Or what? You going to stop us from taking what's rightfully ours?" The situation was escalating quickly. Thomas, the 3rd board member, was already moving toward the trees again, reaching for apples. Patricia was filming me with her phone, probably hoping I'd do something aggressive that she could use against me. That was when Mike Kowalski's cruiser came flying up the driveway, lights blazing. 2 more sheriff's vehicles followed close behind. Mike got out fast, hand near his weapon. "Everyone freeze, hands where I can see them." Patricia immediately switched into victim mode. "Officer, thank God you're here. This man has been threatening us and trying to prevent us from accessing community property." "Ma'am, you're under a restraining order," Mike said. "You're not supposed to be within 500 feet of this property." "That order is under appeal and we have every right to." "The order is still in effect until and unless a court says otherwise," Mike interrupted. "You're currently in violation, which means you're under arrest for contempt of court." The change in Patricia's expression was almost comical. "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president." That doesn't give you special privileges, ma'am. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." What happened next was the most satisfying moment of the entire ordeal. Patricia tried to run. She actually took off toward the trees like she was going to escape through the orchard. She made it about 15 feet before tripping over an exposed root and landing face first in the dirt. Mike walked over calmly, helped her up, and cuffed her while she sputtered about police brutality and her rights. Robert and Thomas were arrested as well, along with 4 other people who hadn't managed to get away fast enough. All of them were charged with criminal trespass and violation of a restraining order. The aftermath was swift and brutal for the HOA board. Patricia was removed as president by an emergency vote of the HOA membership, most of whom were horrified to learn what had been done in their name. Robert and Thomas resigned from the board. All 3 faced criminal charges, and I filed a civil lawsuit against them personally and against the HOA for harassment, trespass, property damage, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The criminal cases were resolved first. Patricia, Robert, and Thomas all pleaded guilty to criminal trespass and violation of a restraining order. Patricia received 90 days in jail, suspended on condition of 1-year probation, 500 hours of community service, and mandatory anger management counseling. She was also ordered to pay restitution for the damage to my property, including the cost of the security system. Robert and Thomas got lighter sentences: probation, community service, and fines. The civil case took longer, but Daniel was relentless. We had mountains of evidence: the vandalism, the false complaints, the organized harassment campaign, the attempted theft of property. The HOA's insurance company took one look at the case and pushed for settlement. We settled for $75,000. $50,000 came from the HOA's insurance, and the remaining $25,000 was split between Patricia, Robert, and Thomas personally. The settlement also included a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from making any claims on my property, along with a formal written apology to be published in the Subdivision newsletter and posted on the HOA website and Facebook group. The new HOA board, elected after the scandal, reached out through Daniel to apologize personally. They were normal, reasonable people who were mortified by what had happened. They asked if I'd be willing to donate apples to a community harvest event, with all proceeds going to the food bank. I agreed, and we set up an annual tradition. Every October, I host a community picking day where families can come and pick apples for a donation to the food bank. It's supervised, respectful, and everyone understands that it's a privilege, not a right. I used some of the settlement money to restore the barn, replace the damaged tree, and set up a scholarship fund at Traverse City Central High School for students pursuing agricultural studies. The rest went into a trust for maintaining the orchard for future generations. Patricia moved away from Meadowbrook Heights about 6 months after the criminal case concluded. I heard through the grapevine that she relocated to Arizona. Robert and Thomas kept low profiles, and I occasionally saw them around town, but they always found somewhere else to be when I was nearby. The orchard thrived. That spring, the trees exploded into bloom just like always, clouds of white and pink petals filling the air with sweetness. I stood among them on a warm April morning, drinking coffee and thinking about my great-grandfather planting these same trees nearly 80 years ago. He'd survived a war and built something lasting and beautiful. He'd created a legacy that fed people, that brought joy, that connected generations. Patricia had tried to take that away based on nothing but entitlement and greed. She'd thought that being HOA president gave her the right to other people's property, that she could bully and intimidate her way to getting what she wanted. She'd been wrong, and it had cost her everything. The next fall, I harvested the biggest crop in years. The trees seemed to respond to the defeat of Patricia's attempted takeover by producing abundantly, as if to prove their resilience. I donated 100 bushels to the food bank, hosted the community picking day that raised $3,000 for charity, and still had enough to make cider, applesauce, and pies for everyone I knew. On Thanksgiving, I invited some of the old farming families over for dinner. We sat around my kitchen table, the same table my great-grandfather had built in 1952, and shared food grown from the land we all loved. Tom Harrison, whose family had farmed the next property over since 1923, raised his glass in a toast. "To standing your ground," he said. "And to knowing the difference between a community and a mob." We drank to that, and I looked out the window at the orchard, bare branches stark against the November sky, resting before spring would bring them back to life again. The land endured, the trees endured, and so would I. The following spring brought new growth, not just in the orchard but in my relationship with Meadowbrook Heights. The new HOA board president, a retired teacher named Jennifer Walsh, stopped by one day with fresh-baked cookies and a genuine apology. "I can't undo what Patricia did," she said, standing at a respectful distance from my porch. "But I want you to know that most of us are good people who were horrified when we found out what was happening." She kept a lot of it quiet, made decisions without consulting the full board, and basically ran the HOA like her personal fiefdom. "I appreciate that," I said, accepting the cookies, "and I'm glad there's new leadership. We've completely rewritten the bylaws," Jennifer continued. "Added oversight, term limits, and a requirement for board votes on any significant actions. What happened to you can never happen to anyone else." Over time, I developed friendly relationships with several Meadowbrook Heights families. It turned out that most of them were normal people who'd bought homes in the subdivision, not because they loved HOAs, but because that's what was available in their price range. They were teachers, nurses, small business owners, young families trying to build lives. They weren't like Patricia. I learned that Patricia had made a lot of people miserable during her tenure. She'd fined people for having the wrong color curtains visible from the street. She'd reported a family to Child Protective Services because their kids' toys were left in the yard overnight. She tried to ban a veteran from flying an American flag because it wasn't the regulation size according to her interpretation of the bylaws. Her downfall had been a relief to almost everyone in the subdivision, though it had taken my situation to finally expose her behavior to the full membership. One Saturday in June, a family from Meadowbrook Heights knocked on my door. The parents, Dave and Linda Morrison, had 2 kids in elementary school and looked nervous about approaching. "Mr. Webb, I'm really sorry to bother you," Dave started. "But our daughter Emma has been learning about agriculture in school, and when she found out we lived near an actual working orchard, she became obsessed. She's been begging us to ask if she could maybe see the trees sometime. We completely understand if you say no, given everything that happened." I looked at Emma, a serious-looking kid about 8 years old, holding a notebook and wearing a shirt with a cartoon apple on it. "What do you want to know about orchards?" I asked her, her face lit up. "Everything. How do you know when to pick the fruit? How do you keep bugs from eating the apples? Why do some trees make better fruit than others? Can you really graft different kinds of apples onto the same tree?" I ended up spending 2 hours walking Emma and her family through the orchard, explaining grafting techniques, integrated pest management, pollination, and the difference between heritage varieties and modern cultivars. Emma took notes in her notebook and asked questions that showed she'd already done considerable research. "You've got a future agriculturalist there," I told her parents as they were leaving. "She wants to be a farmer," Linda said. Which is not something we ever expected, considering we're both accountants and can barely keep houseplants alive. "Bring her back anytime," I said. "I mean that. It's good to see a kid interested in where food comes from." Emma became a regular visitor. I taught her how to prune, how to identify disease, how to harvest properly. She helped me with the community picking day that fall, educating other kids about the orchard. It reminded me why I'd fought so hard to protect this place. It wasn't just about property rights or standing up to a bully. It was about preserving something meaningful and sharing it with people who truly appreciated it. 2 years after the Patricia incident, I expanded the orchard. I planted 20 new trees, a mix of heritage varieties that were becoming rare. Gravenstein, Northern Spy, Cox's Orange Pippin, Newtown Pippin. These were apples with history, with character, with flavors that modern commercial varieties couldn't match. I planted them for the future, for whoever would come after me, whether that was a child of my own someday or a more distant heir who would hopefully value the land as much as I did. The local newspaper ran a story about the orchard, focusing on the heritage varieties and the community picking program. They mentioned the conflict with Patricia only briefly, framing it as a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. The story brought visitors from all over the region, people interested in heritage apples and sustainable agriculture. I started offering workshops on orchard management, pruning techniques, and apple grafting. They were small gatherings, just 5 or 6 people at a time, but word spread. Emma, now 10 years old, assisted with the workshops, having become remarkably knowledgeable about orchard care. One day, I got a letter from Patricia. It was postmarked from Phoenix, Arizona, and I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was surprisingly humble. Patricia admitted that she'd been wrong, that she'd let power go to her head, and that she'd become obsessed with control to the point of losing perspective. She didn't make excuses, though she mentioned that she'd been dealing with personal issues at the time. Her marriage was falling apart, her adult children weren't speaking to her, and she'd channeled her unhappiness into the HOA because it was something she could control, or thought she could. "I destroyed my own life," she wrote. "Lost my home, my friends, my reputation, all because I couldn't let go of something that was never mine to begin with. I'm in therapy now, working on understanding why I became that person. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I recognize what I did was wrong and I'm sorry." I read the letter several times, trying to decide how I felt about it: anger, pity, satisfaction. In the end, I felt mostly sad. Patricia had had everything: a comfortable home, a community, a position of leadership. She'd thrown it all away because she couldn't accept that someone else had something she wanted and that she had no right to it. I wrote back, a brief note acknowledging her apology and wishing her well in her recovery. I didn't forget what she'd done, but I didn't see the point in holding on to anger either. She'd lost everything that mattered to her. That seemed like punishment enough. Years passed. The orchard matured. Emma graduated high school and went to Michigan State University to study agricultural science. She came back every summer to help with the orchard, now as a paid intern. The community picking days became a beloved tradition, raising over $10,000 for the food bank over the years. I met someone, finally. Her name was Rachel, and she was a veterinarian who'd moved to Traverse City from Chicago, seeking a slower pace of life. She loved the orchard immediately, understanding why I'd fought so hard to protect it. We got married under the apple trees in bloom, surrounded by friends and family and the ghosts of all the Webbs who'd tended this land before me. Rachel and I talked about the future, about kids of our own who would grow up climbing these trees and learning the rhythms of the seasons. We talked about expansion, maybe adding a farm stand, maybe getting some chickens and bees. The land had so much more to give, and we had time to discover it together. One fall afternoon, about 5 years after the Patricia incident, Jennifer Walsh called me. She'd remained HOA president, doing a good job of bringing sanity and fairness to the role. "Marcus, I wanted to give you a heads up," she said. "The HOA is commissioning a historical marker to be placed at the entrance to Meadowbrook Heights. It's going to commemorate the farming history of this area, including your family's orchard. We're calling it the Webb Orchard Historic Site. I hope that's okay with you." I was surprised and touched. "That's more than okay, Jennifer, thank you. It's the least we can do. Your family has been stewarding this land since before any of us got here. That deserves recognition." The dedication ceremony for the historical marker was held on a perfect October Saturday. Half the subdivision turned out, along with descendants of other old farming families, local historians, and the mayor of Traverse City. The marker was beautiful, made of bronze and granite, with text describing the agricultural heritage of the area, and specifically mentioning the Webb family orchard established in 1947. Emma, home from college for the weekend, stood with Rachel and me as the mayor unveiled the marker. She'd grown into a confident young woman, and I was proud to have played a small part in nurturing her passion for agriculture. "This is what community actually means," Emma said quietly as we watched the ceremony. "People respecting each other, honoring history, working together." Not whatever Patricia thought it meant. "Exactly right," I agreed. That evening, Rachel and I walked through the orchard as the sun set, apples hanging heavy on the branches, the air sweet with the scent of ripe fruit. This land had tested me, forcing me to defend what was mine against people who thought they could simply take it. But in the process, I'd also discovered something important. Property rights weren't just about ownership. They were about stewardship, about protecting something precious so it could be shared appropriately, on terms that honored both the gift and the giver. The trees my great-grandfather planted in 1947 were still producing, still feeding people, still beautiful. They'd outlasted Patricia's greed, outlasted conflict and harassment, outlasted everything except the patient turning of seasons and the enduring strength of deep roots. I picked an apple, a perfect golden delicious, and bit into it. The flavor was complex, sweet with hints of honey and spice, the taste of home and history and hard-fought peace. "What are you thinking about?" Rachel asked, sliding her arm around my waist. "How lucky I am," I said. "To have this place, to have you, to have learned that some things are worth fighting for. And some battles are worth winning," she added. We stood there as darkness fell, surrounded by the orchard that had become more than just trees and fruit. It was a testament to resilience, to the importance of standing your ground, and to the truth that real community is built on respect, not entitlement. The orchard would be here long after I was gone, feeding future generations, teaching new lessons, growing toward the light. And somewhere in Phoenix, Patricia was hopefully learning her own lessons about humility, boundaries, and the cost of trying to take what isn't yours. As for me, I was exactly where I belonged, on land my family had tended for generations, protecting a legacy that had proven worth protecting. The HOA had tried to claim my orchard as community property, forgetting that the trees predated their subdivision by decades. In the end, history had won. Heritage had won. And the orchard, my orchard, stood as proof that some things can't be voted away, no matter how determined the Karens of the world might be. I pulled Rachel closer as the first stars appeared above the trees, and we walked back to the house together, leaving the orchard to its eternal work of growing, blooming, and bearing fruit for all the seasons yet to come.